Chapter 25 Outpost Tremonius, Zeta Halo, April 18th, 2560, Day 128. Lucas Browning stayed at the back of the Banished transport, making himself as invisible as possible. The brute Itakis hadn't relayed anything at all when he'd taken Lucas from his cell in the tower and dragged him outside across the tarmac to a phantom dropship. He'd been shoved aboard the open side bay door and then ushered to the back as it filled with other brutes and elites. The phantom kept its side doors open, which allowed the air to flow in and blow off the stink of Jerohanai, a small but intensely welcome gift. As much as he wanted to know where he was going and why, after a cursory inspection he kept his mouth shut and his head down. After these past several weeks, he knew better. It was no longer fear, exactly. That had been systematically beaten out of him on the daily. It was the utter exhaustion that kept him compliant and constantly dulled any rising fear. He'd lost a good 30 pounds, if not more, his body weak, his mind given to dizzy spells and emotional outbursts. Today, though, his mental state became a little clearer just by virtue of it being different than all the other days he'd been held captive. He appeared to be the only prisoner on board, and was perhaps being transferred to another prison or about to be used for some other purpose. If they wanted him dead, it would already have happened by now. At least that's what he told himself. The flight could have taken 5 minutes or 20, and he wouldn't have noticed. He'd stopped measuring things in time, as it only seemed to weigh heavily on him whenever he did. Although it was too packed to see much during the trip, he did glimpse clouds and mountaintops the few times he lifted his head, and as the Banished craft began its descent, he noted the change in temperature from balmy to a crisp, arid cool. The elite contingent leapt out before the Phantom's embarking ramp touched the ground, followed by the brutes as the craft settled into a low hover. Itakis's giant hand wrapped around Lucas's bicep and gave a jerk, lifting him onto his feet, but thankfully not hard enough to dislocate his shoulder, or worse. During his captivity, he'd had the misfortune of witnessing the brutes engaging with other human prisoners in a horrific game their captors called tossers. The carnage and the screaming that ensued would haunt him until his dying day, which might be any time now. Stars danced in his field of vision, and he blinked rapidly to stave off the approaching dizziness as Itakis hauled him off the edge of the carriage and threw him to the ground like a rucksack. Pain erupted in his shoulder and hip and his head as it slapped onto the tarmac. Immediately warmth spread down the side of his face as he pushed himself up, gritting his teeth, not making a noise. They paid more attention when you made noise. That was for damn sure. He couldn't wipe the blood away because Itakis now had him by the neck, setting him back on his feet and pushing him along. The Banished group that had amassed was the largest gathering he'd seen since Reverie. A crowd of Jerohanai, Sanghili, Ungoi, Kigyar, all flowing toward one central location and drawing his eye up. Lucas's heart dropped like a stone. It was the mortal Reverie. The once proud vessel rose above him, broken, blackened, haunting, but still doggedly there despite the newly created Banished outpost in her shadow. Slashes of red enemy war paint branded the outpost that now occupied the entire terrain along the port side of Reverie's hull, filling him with rage and a deep, stinging grief. The sight forced him to revisit the terrible memories and sudden death, flashes in the dark, shrieks of pain, endless gunfire. Gavin. His throat, nose, and eyes stung, but he was too dehydrated to produce a single tear. They just seemed stuck in his throat, choking him as anguish swelled his chest and pushed into his face until he felt the pressure to scream. Soon he was stumbling down a ramp and swept along a well-worn path that eventually led into one of the Banished outpost structures near Reverie's stern. Within was a Banished command post with holographic displays and readouts, and more Banished staring strangely at him. He was ushered down a side corridor that bored deep into the mountain below ever even seen. Lucas dared not gawk or keep his head up too long if he wanted to keep it intact, but at the end of the corridor they entered a large, dimly lit chamber littered with Banished excavation equipment. Here more Banished had gathered, and when they saw him, they parted to make way. He glanced nervously as dozens of eyes seemed to fall on him, following his progression farther into the chamber. His pulse kicked up a notch. The hairs on the back of his neck tingled as his gaze was drawn to the right side of the room and a strange yellow glow. He tried to swallow, but couldn't. He tried to slow down, but failed to do that either. Itakas kept him moving with a hard poke in the shoulder. Why did he feel so itchy all of a sudden? As if spiders were crawling over his skin. Upright against the wall, a large rectangular device with a bizarre humanoid outline was lit with yellow pulsing light. Cables snaked out from the device and into Banished power generators and machines, technology that he'd witnessed previously being used to override Forerunner defense systems. Lucas's heartbeat seemed to change and pulse in time with the yellow light. A console sat in front of the device. Off to the side, a massive Jiralhanae in red and gold combat armor turned slowly to gaze at him as he approached. Instinctively, he knew. This was a figure of absolute authority. War Chief Escharum himself. Had to be. The brute's skin was a weathered gray with deep furrows in his brow and along the ridges of his nose, as though in a perpetual scowl. Wispy light gray eyebrows hung over small eyes of differing color, one opaque with a scar slashed from cheekbone to eyebrow, and the other a menacing red. A pale beard hung from his chin. Another scar cut through the right side of his lips where a tusk should have been. His long mouth curved at the sight of Lucas, revealing a row of sharp teeth. Lucas went light-headed and his steps grew sluggish, as though he were walking through mud. "War Chief," Itakas said from behind him, "here is the human, as you requested. Bring him to the Silex." Escherum's voice vibrated the very air, going through Lucas like a drum and lighting every nerve. He'd thought he was done feeling fear, but it rose swift and vibrant as Itakas led him straight to the towering war chief. Yet the massive Jiralhanae stepped aside, smirking as Itakas's immense leathery hand gripped Lucas's wrist and tugged him toward the console and closer to the Silex, as Escharum called it. Lucas glanced down at the console and then around at the assemblage, the alien faces looking back at him, appearing oddly apprehensive. The sight was so strange, he wondered if this was all just some terrible nightmare. Either way, he'd never felt so helpless and alone in all his life. Escharum gave a faint nod to Itakas. In a swift gesture, the brute grabbed Lucas's hand and slapped it onto the cool, glassy surface of the console. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, but Lucas didn't know why or what was supposed to happen. Suddenly, the surface of the console became cold. Instinctively, he tried to pull away, but the brute held fast to his wrist, the bones starting to give. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the pain in his wrist or the increasingly freezing console, but it became so cold that it burned. Burned until he bit so hard on his lip to keep from crying out that blood burst into his mouth and he blurted out, "Stop, please, stop!" No one was even paying attention to him. They were all focused on the Silex, while on the console panel alien glyphs emerged. Light bled outward from the console and down into the cables that ran across the platform and up into the device, activating it. The Silex shifted, alloy parts sliding out and folding away. The thing was opening. Horror coiled around his chest and his pulse beat wildly. For a moment he forgot about the cold freezing his palm. There was nothing in his training or education to identify what was being revealed. The being within the device. All Lucas could do was stare in awe. It was remarkably tall, with a lithe, mostly humanoid body, adorned with a large triangular headpiece. Nearly all of its form was covered in dark burgundy armor with plates over its slim shoulders, forearms, hips, and thighs. Its torso was long and tube-like, more insectile than human. The same yellow light that had outlined the creature on the silex began to glow from two circular insets in the armor, one in the breastplate and another in the center of the triangular headpiece, which curved around two widely spaced closed eyes and a small mouth. Its hands were bare, each revealing 4 long fingers tipped with claws. As Lucas tried to pull away, the brute held him still. But at least the cold was beginning to recede now that the silex was open. Apprehension lay thick in the chamber. Several seconds passed, and for the briefest of moments, Lucas wondered if the creature was dead. But then the head moved from side to side, and its hands opened and closed. Oh, God. He swallowed and couldn't seem to pull enough air into his lungs. Sweat dripped down the sides of his face. The eyes popped open, jet black and glassy. An unnerving, bifurcated mouth drew into a slow, sapient grin. The being floated out of the device, then swept an imperious gaze around the chamber. A slow, gritty female voice emerged from the violet-gray face. "Who are you to gather before me?" Lucas wasn't sure how he understood her through his earpiece, but imagined that she spoke in some Forerunner language Oni had reverse-engineered. Her gaze settled on Escharum. "We are the Banished," the war chief answered, his words delivered with strength and precision. "We have set you free." The emancipated creature tilted her head at him in mild, momentary curiosity, before returning her attention to her surroundings. "Banished." She dwelled on the term. "I hesitate to believe you understand such a title's true meaning." "We know very well who we are." Escharum was firm but remained curious. "Now it is time we knew the same of you." "I am the Harbinger." Her voice rang out with utter superiority as she swept another glance around the chamber before settling once more on Escharum. "All that you know shall be undone." He stared back, taking stock, and broke the silence with one simple word. "Good." It echoed through Lucas with singular devastation. His legs went weak and he swayed, snatching his hand from Itakis's lax grip and cradling it to his chest. Flexing fingers that ached, he hoped they weren't fractured or frostbitten. His actions caused the Harbinger's gaze to snap to him. Ensnared like hapless prey, he froze, unable to look away. Her head cocked with open curiosity. Then a slow smile of recognition tugged at one corner of her mouth, the kind of smile that immediately turned the blood in his veins to ice. "This one will be mine."